I think philosophy is overrated. And I think this is going to come across as really weird considering that this channel is basically about philosophy. But I think this will make sense in a second after I sort of explain myself. So maybe this is kind of the case for you. I know it's the case for me. A lot of the wisest people in my life who I value their opinion, their advice over anyone, they don't know much about philosophy at all. I mean, they might know who philosophers are, they might know who Plato is, Aristotle, Nietzsche, whatever, but they don't actually like read them. And not only do they not read them, they probably don't even understand them. And yet, if I'm going through something in my life, whether it be a relationship problem, professional problem, whatever, these same people are the ones who I turn to it for advice. I don't turn to people for advice who are like experts on Nietzsche or experts on Aristotle or experts on XYZ. I mean, some of them I might, but that's just a coincidence, I think. And I'm sure many of you guys are the same, right? You don't need to have read all these philosophical texts to become wise. In fact, it can be argued that reading these philosophical texts, especially if you become dogmatic about it, which many people do, will actually lead you to becoming dumber. You might know all of these facts and all these theories about the world and whatnot, but you actually have less of a ability to enact it in your real life. And so Nietzsche actually had Nietzsche, a philosopher himself, but also in a way an anti-philosopher. He actually had a term for this. He called them philosophical laborers. He said, "You are not a real philosopher if you're just sitting in your ivory tower at your university, studying these great minds, regurgitating the things that they said, writing theses and treatises about the great things that they said, becoming experts at them without creating values yourself, without attempting to create a life and create your own ideas. You're just regurgitating stuff. You're not a philosopher. You are a philosophical laborer, a true philosopher." And this is why I say philosophy in the sense of how most people talk about it. A true philosopher creates values. A lot of the people that Nietzsche really admired, they weren't philosophers. He admired some other philosophers for sure, but a lot of the great men that he really admired throughout history were not philosophers. He admired people like Napoleon, Julius Caesar. Um, there's a bunch of other great men throughout history, not necessarily just within war, a lot of poets, a lot of writers, right? Goethe, a bunch of different people. There were some philosophers, of course, that he admired as well, but he didn't necessarily need to have them to be philosophers for him to learn something from them, for him to consider them to be a great man who is more worthy to be listened to, right? And so, why is this? Well, what I think a true philosopher, most people delve into philosophy because they want to find answers, okay? Because philosophy is about the truth, right? If it's about the truth, then the truth must be out there, just floating around for us to be able to grasp, for us to be able to just take. That's not true, at least, especially from a Nietzschean perspective. For Nietzsche, life is all about different perspectives that we have, and we paint our life perspectives and the way we view the world with our own subjective values. There might be some central truth to the world, but it's not something that we can necessarily grasp. And if we could grasp it, why would we want to grasp it anyway? What if that's truth is something that we don't like? What if it's something that's not exciting, that doesn't make life beautiful? Instead, he proposes potentially the value of untruth, creating untruths, these falsifications to create and live life by. That's kind of what the artist does, you know? But besides Nietzsche, let's look to another philosopher, Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger believed that he uses the word primordial a lot, that sort of the mission of life, I guess I could say. You know what? The best way for me to do this is to quote him, actually. Let me find my book here. So, Heidegger has a interesting way of describing human beings. He calls it Dasein. So Dasein is German for being there. So he just describes humans as being there. I'm not going to explain why because this would be like way too long a video. But if he says Dasein, that just means humans. Okay. This isn't Heidegger saying this. This is somebody writing about Heidegger, uh, Michael Watts. So I'm going to quote from his book on Heidegger because it's such a great explanation about what Heidegger believes about life. Okay. So he says, so Dasein's authentic understanding essentially consists of the awareness of its own range of available possibilities, which are already given concrete possibilities of the worldly situation into which it has been thrown. This understanding involves a holistic projection of a context in which particular possibilities become intelligible. So, according to Heidegger's understanding, what we are is the concrete given possibilities of our thrownness, and these possibilities, which constitutes what we already are and who we always already are what we should develop and thus become. To become what one is, however, requires interpretation. Interpretation is the concrete working through of the possibilities projected by understanding, for in the process of interpretation, the quote, the understanding appropriates understandingly that which is understood by it. In interpretation, understanding does not become something different, it becomes itself, unquote. I probably sound like a crazy person saying that because I was like, huh? Like the first time, it took me a while to understand what he was really getting at there. But basically, what Heidegger is getting at is that we all sort of have this kind of primordial understanding of our being, that we're thrown into a certain world, a certain society, which he calls thrownness, into a they world meaning, my world as somebody who's half raised in Japan, half raised in the US is going to be different than somebody being raised in, Vietnam, right? or sub-Saharan Africa. So you're limited with your possibilities based off of the world that you're thrown into. However, you understand just naturally before even learning about it with philosophy and everything that you are a temporal being, right? I exist now. There is a past time of myself. There's a future time of myself. And I only have a certain amount of time to discover who I am and be who I am within that time. And from a Heideggerian worldview, there's times in your life where you're basically just getting red pilled all the time, so you have this preconceived idea of what the world is based off of the world you're thrown into, the society you're thrown into. But then you have things that happen that make you question that reality, and you feel this through the mood of anxiousness. And when you're anxious, most people, they, instead of actually like trying to uncover the truth about the world, about themselves, they'll revert back to their everydayness, as he calls it, the they world, the society that they grew up in. So if you're like a carpenter, or you're a plumber, or you're an IT guy, usually most people will just identify themselves with that label. What do you do for a living? Is kind of saying, what do you do for the matrix? What do you do for society? Oh, I'm this, this, and that, right? And so every once in a while, we'll have these feelings of making us question the validity of those things. Is this who I really am? Is this society really thinking the best for me? I wonder. And most people don't have the courage to actually dive down that rabbit hole, you know? And so, but we have this, what he calls it, a pre-ontological understanding of that. We have this understanding a priori before any sort of other understanding of it, right? You don't need philosophy to uncover this. And so whenever somebody talks about things like the red pill, right? The red pill is a metaphor which has meaning to you because it already attaches to this idea that you already believed in the first place. You already believed in the first place that maybe a lot of this stuff that society is telling me is bullshit, but this helps me put a label on it. This is the red pill, right? That's why the red pill is so popular. And it's so, it's not this idea that's planted into people's minds. It's just a label. It's a metaphor for what we already believe to be true, right? And so because of that, we have a lot of these different concepts, a lot of these different ideas of living a meaningful life that comes a priori before having some sort of philosophical context that some philosopher frames it for you. So a good philosopher doesn't give you answers. He asks you the right question. He gives you the right frameworks for you to understand things that you already believe to be true, things that are primordial, that is inherent within who you are as a person. So that's why I like philosophers like Nietzsche and Heidegger, who are more interested in asking the right questions and getting their readers to think a certain way rather than saying like, here's the answer. And this whole tradition of here's the answer, let's find the truth, is arguably started by Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle, that thinks that believed that there was an essence to every single thing, that everything had a telos, a meaning, a purpose. And he's wrote some amazing things like Nicomachean Ethics. I love that book, but there's not much nuance there. He's basically like, this is the thing, and then the golden mean between the two is this thing, and this is just how it is. This is how human beings are, right? And so for centuries, Christendom, Christianity in Europe was like, yes, yes, Aristotle. You're right. This is the truth. Anything else is stupid and dumb. Like, this is correct. We cannot question this. This is just facts, bro. You know, people like to have answers, right? Um, so most people want philosophy for that reason. The best philosophers make you question things and help give you the frameworks to question your own life, because your own subjective life is way too complicated for there to be a universal solution. And so where am I going with all this? Well, the wise people that you know in your life that don't know shit about philosophy, they are people who feel these things of anxiety, right? Everything that I just talked about with Heidegger, they don't they don't necessarily know Heidegger or have studied Heidegger, but if I explain that to them, they'll be like, yeah, I've had those situations in my life. I know that I make value judgments based off of what I want to be, what I want to become, who I care about, based off of me knowing that I only have a limited amount of time within my lifetime. And based on that, I want to treat other people a certain way. I want them to treat me a certain way. There's times where I feel scared, but you know what? Every time when I was scared, I ended up and I faced my fear. I never regretted it. Every time I didn't face my fear and I ran away, I regretted it. And so these admirable people, without studying Heidegger, without studying Nietzsche, come to these correct and incredible solutions about life and these perspectives on life that can actually help you out. They don't need philosophy to do this. In fact, I think for most people, they need philosophy because they need that help. They're not actually that strong person deep down. Philosophy helps to strengthen weak people. Sometimes people are just strong and they don't need that stuff. They just know it and they can just do it. And then maybe this can help remind them if they lose their way. For me personally, I'm getting a little personal here. I feel like I'm not naturally a strong person. I had to learn to become strong. And one of the ways in which I learned to become strong is studying these philosophers. It helped me for sure. But was that the only way for me to do that? No. Somebody who was already strong wouldn't have needed that. They just wouldn't. And let's be honest, like most people, when you think of like a strong, capable individual, you're probably not thinking of like a Mr. Philosophy guy. You're probably thinking of some professional fighter or some athlete or some great entrepreneur or whatever, right? Some great military general. You think these guys are off studying philosophers? Of course, no. Some of them are, but a lot aren't because they don't need to. In fact, philosophy is, especially the way it's understood in the modern day, is kind of slave morality. It is. I'm going to talk about this in another video, but slave morality, self-improvement is slave morality. It's not inherently necessarily a bad thing, although slave morality is, slaves are bad according to a Nietzschean master morality worldview. But slave morality actually ended up winning out over master morality because it had the ability to introspect. It had the ability for the spirit to deepen, for you to actually turn your cruelty, outward cruelty, in toward yourself to become a stronger version of yourself. But the old noble framework, they didn't actually need that. They were just strong and just powerful, and that's just how they were, right? So yes, philosophy can definitely help your life, but I do think it's overrated. You can live a fantastic life without having to read philosophy. You just can, if you pay attention. Because if you just are simply paying attention, you're present with every moment in your life and you don't lie to yourself. And anytime you feel anxiety, anytime you feel fear, you observe it and you try to conquer it. You don't run away from it. That type of person, without learning anything about philosophy, will be a much more admirable, much more, dare I say, philosophically sound person in terms of the consistency of their lifestyle and, them actually living an admirable life than a philosophical laborer who just reads about great philosophers and great men and doesn't actually do anything. So this channel, yes, I want to cover philosophy. I love philosophy, but I don't want it to become a mental masturbation channel. It's important to make sure that you're applying these concepts to your real life. And that's why I try to live what I preach on my channel as well. When I say, hey, the US is kind of a scam, you should leave, I'm not saying that from the confines of the US. I'm saying that as somebody who's actually outside of it, living in Southeast Asia. Okay. Like, it's important for me to actually live that lifestyle. If I say, hey, it's important to be consistent with anything that you want to do in life, well, I have to hold up my end of the bargain, live that truth by posting on my YouTube channel every day, right? It's difficult for me to get myself to like use my brain juice and talk about this stuff on a daily basis, but I force myself to do it because I know from my own personal experience, observing my experience throughout my life, that that leads to good things. And when I don't do that, it leads to bad things. I didn't need Nietzsche or Aristotle or whoever to tell me that. Or if they did tell me that, they reminded me of something that I already knew. So yeah, if if somebody were to ask me like, oh well, I want life advice, who should I read? I would be like, you're asking the wrong question, man, because you're not going to find answers from these people. They're just going to give you perspectives that help you understand your own life better. The best advice that I can give you is to live courageously. Whenever you feel fear, whenever you feel anxiety, write it down. Don't lie to yourself about it. Meditate on it. Do not run away. And if you're able to do that, you are a true philosopher and not one of those philosophical laborers. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, I'll see you next video. Goodbye.